The late 70s, the golden era of Japanese motorcycles. Despite the success of the iconic CB750 and the birth of a new class of sports motorcycles with this model, Honda managed to fall behind its competitors. It became difficult for her to compete with motorcycles like the Suzuki GS1000 and the king of the streets at that time, the Kawasaki Z1. The company needed to make a new statement. Honda once again drew attention with a new model called the CBX. Take note of the incredible 6-cylinder Symphony. In the 60s, Honda competed in races against 4-cylinder 4-stroke, Suzuki and Yamaha. Honda's chief engineer, Saikiro Iramazuri, was convinced that the number of cylinders was the only way to win at the Grand Prix. Later, this theory was successfully confirmed by Mike Halewood, who won every race in the 1966 World Championship on the legendary 6-cylinder Honda RC166. This same philosophy would become the main weapon for the CBX in the battle for a place in the civilian motorcycle market. In the 70s, Honda's motorcycle division was limited in resources for a while because the company had focused all its efforts on its rapidly growing automobile business. But as competitors like Suzuki, Yamaha, and Kawasaki started to catch up and surpass Honda, the company needed a bold and loud response. Iramazuri recalls that we felt there was something exciting and thrilling in the CBX that was missing in the 4-cylinder CB1000F. Something that couldn't be measured by numbers.
Jag förstår inte det.
It was a fantastic engine, smooth, balanced, with a very unique sound. As soon as this motorcycle hit the road, its 6-barrel exhaust simply scared people. This sound was then compared to the sound of an F-15 fighter jet, which had appeared a few years earlier. Therefore, in the touring and later versions of the CBX, the exhaust was made more traditional. But when a CBX owner installed a tuned exhaust, they would get a sound that, without exaggeration, resembled that of a Formula One car. But the CBX power unit not only sounded good, it was also very powerful at the time of its release. By the way, it was the world's first production motorcycle with more than 100 horsepower. It had enough racing roots to give the motorcycle the status of a superbike of those years. The engine combined developments from two different racing worlds, from the mid-60s Grand Prix and early 70s endurance races. The CBX was developed in parallel with inline force for endurance racing, and lessons were learned from these developments. The experience was later applied to motorcycles such as the CB900 and CBX. It turns out that Iramazuri took the successful inline-6 configuration and enhanced it with the capabilities of endurance prototypes. Such a tandem of racing heritage simply could not leave any motorsport fan indifferent, just as the CB750 once did with its numerous victories.
Dick Van wins. Man had completed the 200 miles in 1 hour, 57 minutes, and 13 seconds, fastest in history.
The CBX 1000 was entirely and solely a promoter. The motorcycle shot a quarter mile in 11.5 seconds, and its top speed reached 225 kilometers per hour. A true hyperbike of its time. Powerful, balanced, predictable. The engine was a true gem of the motorcycle. A unique gem. And it was also quite compact, as much as possible for a 6-cylinder engine in a motorcycle. And of course, it was very beautiful. The engineers specifically chose air cooling to avoid covering it with a large radiator. The wide cooling fins only emphasized its charm. This was also facilitated by the way the engine was mounted in the chassis. It was attached to a backbone frame, like on the 1965 Honda Super Hawk, where no part of the frame passed under the engine. And starting with the frame, continuing with the suspension, and ending with the brakes, in all of this, the CBX was no longer so exemplary. The main problem with these components was their outdated technology, even at the time of release. The same fate befell the two-stroke street killer Kawasaki H2 Mach 4, which had appeared a few years earlier. Their engines were too powerful for their frames, suspensions, and braking systems. The brakes, in particular, would overheat very quickly during intense riding. Additionally, the CBX was also quite a heavy motorcycle with a dry weight of just under 250 kilograms. With this motorcycle, Honda was also aiming to participate in races. But the CBX appeared in 1979, just at the moment when the AMA was considering whether 1,000 cubic centimeter superbikes were too much for the existing tracks. The motorcycle formula will reduce the regulations to 750 cubic centimeters in the 1983 season. Perhaps it's for the best. Even provided CBX models for participation in the Isle of Man TT races, but the weak frame, brakes, suspension, and overall not very outstanding chassis did not allow the model's full sporting potential to be realized. By 1981, Honda had transitioned the CBX 1000 to a sport touring version, forgetting about this model as a racing motorcycle. And perhaps it was in vain, because subsequent versions of the motorcycle almost completely fixed the issues with the brakes and suspension. And at one time, the racing version of the Kawasaki H2 showed that it was possible to win races even without the best frame. However, things turned out the way they did. The 1979 models had the factory designation CBXC, featuring silver-colored wheel rims and a maximum engine power of 105 horsepower. In 1980, the model underwent changes, receiving black wheel rims, an enlarged oil cooler, and other cylinder head adjustments which reduced the maximum power to 103 horsepower. The year 1981 was marked by a major restyling of the CBX 1000 model, factory code CBXB. From this generation, the model becomes a full-fledged sport tourer with a plastic fairing and side cases. The ergonomics and overall dimensions change. The rear suspension receives purling progression and is equipped with an air monoshock. The braking system becomes dual piston at the front and rear instead of single piston. The fuel tank capacity increases from 20 to 22 liters, while the maximum engine power decreases to 100 horsepower. 1982 was the last year of production for the model, during which the motorcycle remained virtually unchanged. The only external difference from last year's model was the presence of a plastic handle on the passenger seat. The Honda CBX 1000 model was an export version and was mainly intended for the markets of North America and Europe. And unfortunately, on the key American market, sales of the models can be said to have failed spectacularly. The Honda CBXC cost a staggering $3,200 at the time of its release, which was at least a third more expensive than competitor motorcycles. Plus, the future that Honda envisioned for themselves was a bit different from what actually happened. The widespread race for the number of cylinders did not happen, and where Honda offered an inline-six, competitors responded with fours. For example, the Suzuki GS 1000, launched at the same time as the CBX, was a much better machine, almost as fast as the big Honda, although it produced significantly less power, but it was lighter and more agile. From this moment, superbikes will become sleeker, sharper, and even more powerful. Soon, Honda will have to play by the market rules again and release motorcycles like the Honda CB900F. Despite the fact that the CBX was clearly created as a showcase of Honda's technology for the global market, and despite being one of the first Japanese machines specifically built for the US market, the later, duller CBXB version turned out to be more in demand in America. Most likely, this was the result of the overwhelming sales success of the 1976 Honda GL 1000 Goldwing models in the United States. Today, the CBX has a cult status and prices remain high, especially for the Z and models with original specifications, although the B model is considered the best in terms of ride quality. And the CBX will turn heads everywhere you decide to go. It is absolutely unique, original, and striking. Its appearance is truly iconic for classic motorcycles. Where else would you find such a dramatically large yet elegant fuel tank? The CBX was the last true representative of the classic superbike era of the 70s. The most flamboyant of its kind, the CBX brought Honda back into the game.